Major Sarah Chen felt the Boeing 737's engines rumble to life beneath her feet, and for the first time in 12 years of military service, she wished she was anywhere but on an aircraft. She pressed her forehead against the cool window of Seat 8A, watching ground crew members in orange vests wave their illuminated batons at United Flight 447. Tuesday afternoon at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, the terminal buzzed with the usual chaos of travelers dragging roller bags, children whining about delays, business people barking into phones. Everything was perfectly, numbingly ordinary. Sarah closed her eyes and felt the weight of her father's dog tags beneath her civilian blouse, the metal warm against her skin. She'd worn them every day for 27 years, ever since the Air Force chaplain handed them to her at his funeral. She was 7 years old then, too young to understand that her hero wasn't coming home. Now, at 34, she understood death intimately. She'd seen it from 15,000 feet, delivered it with precision-guided missiles, and 3 months ago in Afghanistan, she disobeyed direct orders to prevent it. That decision would be dissected by a military review board in exactly 72 hours. The flight attendant's cheerful voice crackled through the speakers, announcing their departure time and flight duration: 4 hours and 18 minutes to San Francisco. Sarah had chosen this flight deliberately, the longest direct route she could find, the maximum time she could spend suspended between her past and an uncertain future. Up here, the review board didn't exist. Her commanding officer's disappointed face couldn't reach her. The letter from the Department of Defense, formally notifying her of potential court-martial proceedings, was just paper in a folder in her apartment. "Excuse me, ma'am, that's my seat." Sarah looked up. A man in his 60s stood in the aisle, pointing at Seat 8B. He wore a faded navy ball cap with gold anchors embroidered on the brim, and his weathered face carried the particular kind of lines that came from squinting into distant horizons. His eyes, pale blue, alert, swept over her with the quick assessment of someone who'd spent a lifetime reading situations. "Sorry." Sarah grabbed her bag from 8B and shoved it under the seat in front of her. The veteran settled in with a soft grunt, his joints protesting. He caught her glancing at his cap and tapped it with one finger. "USS Constellation, 68 to 71. You military?" Sarah hesitated. Usually she was proud to answer that question. Today the words felt like stones in her throat. "Air Force, F-16 pilot." His eyebrows rose appreciably. "Fighter jock, huh? Don't see many of you folks flying commercial." "On leave," Sarah said shortly, hoping he'd take the hint. He did. The veteran nodded, pulled out a worn paperback, Tom Clancy naturally, and settled back. But before he opened it, he said quietly, "Whatever's weighing on you, kid, it'll work out how it's supposed to work out. Always does." Sarah wanted to believe that. She wanted to believe that the review board would understand why she'd broken formation, ignored her squadron commander's explicit orders, and used her last missiles to take out a truck convoy that wasn't her assigned target. She'd watched through her targeting system as that convoy approached a village, women and children visible in the streets below. Intelligence said the village was clear, that the convoy was just supplies. But Sarah's gut, honed by 2 combat tours, screamed otherwise. She'd been right. The convoy was carrying explosives meant to level that village. Her actions saved an estimated 200 civilians. They also violated the chain of command, endangered her wingman who'd had to cover her unauthorized action, and created a diplomatic incident because the convoy belonged to a warlord the U.S. was supposedly allied with. "Ladies and gentlemen, flight attendants, prepare for departure." The plane lurched backward, pushed by the tug vehicle. Sarah's hands instinctively gripped the armrests, not from fear of flying, but from the sudden need to be in control. In her F-16, she was in command. She made split-second decisions at Mach 1.5. She danced through hostile airspace with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what their machine could do. Here, she was just a passenger. The engine's pitch increased as they taxied toward the runway. Around her, the cabin filled with the typical pre-flight symphony. A baby crying 3 rows back. A businessman in 12C already typing aggressively on his laptop, despite the electronic device restrictions. A young mother across the aisle desperately trying to entertain twin toddlers with a tablet that kept slipping from their grabby hands. "Mommy, I don't like planes," one twin whimpered. "It's okay, baby. It's perfectly safe. Safer than driving, remember." Sarah felt a pang in her chest. That mother had no idea that her child's safety was about to depend on a hungover captain with 20,000 hours of flight time, a fresh-out-of-training co-pilot, and an underpaid maintenance crew that serviced 40 planes a day. Commercial aviation was safe, statistically, incredibly safe, but Sarah knew better than most that statistics meant nothing when you were the outlier. The plane turned onto the runway. Through her window, Sarah could see the heat shimmer rising from the tarmac, the distant terminals glinting in the harsh Texas sun. Her phone buzzed one final time before she switched it to airplane mode, a text from her squadron mate, probably checking in. She ignored it. The engines roared. The plane accelerated, pressing Sarah back into her seat. She felt the familiar rush of takeoff, that moment when physics overcomes inertia and tons of metal defy gravity. The nose lifted. The ground fell away. Dallas became a patchwork quilt of highways and buildings, shrinking below them. At 10,000 feet, the flight attendants began their safety demonstration. Sarah had it memorized. She could probably recite it in her sleep. Exits here and here, oxygen masks drop from above, seat cushions serve as flotation devices. She'd always found it grimly amusing that they told you about flotation devices on a flight that would cross the Rocky Mountains. If they went down over Colorado, a seat cushion wouldn't help much. The seatbelt sign dinked off. The businessman immediately resumed typing. The mother managed to get both twins interested in a coloring book. The veteran beside her had already dozed off, his book open on his lap. Sarah reached into her bag and pulled out a bottle of Advil. The migraine that had been building behind her eyes since this morning was getting worse. 3 weeks of leave and she'd barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that convoy exploding, felt the shudder of her F-16 as the missiles launched, heard her commander's furious voice over the radio. She dry swallowed 2 pills and leaned back, closing her eyes. The plane climbed steadily toward its cruising altitude of 36,000 feet. The cabin lights dimmed slightly. The hum of the engines became white noise, almost soothing. Sarah's breathing slowed, her hands unclenched. For the first time in weeks, she felt the tension in her shoulders ease slightly. She didn't know that in 47 minutes, everything would change. She didn't know that the captain in the cockpit, a 58-year-old father of 3 with a heart condition he'd hidden from the airline, was experiencing chest pain. She didn't know that the young first officer beside him had logged exactly 187 hours of flight time, most of it in perfect weather. She didn't know that she'd chosen seat 8A, the same number as her fighter jet designation, for the last time as just a passenger. All Sarah knew, as she drifted toward sleep somewhere over the Texas Panhandle, was that she was exhausted, bone-tired, soul-weary. She was asleep in seat 8A when her life became extraordinary. Sarah's eyes snapped open to a sound that didn't belong. It wasn't the normal turbulence rattle, the kind that made nervous flyers grip armrests while seasoned travelers barely looked up from their magazines. This was different. This was metal under stress, a deep vibration that resonated through the aircraft's frame like a tuning fork struck wrong. Her internal clock told her she'd been asleep for maybe 45 minutes. The cabin was dim, set to mid-flight ambience. Most passengers had settled into that airplane trance, reading, watching tiny screens, dozing. The twins across the aisle were finally quiet, slumped against their mother. The businessman had his laptop balanced precariously, still working. The plane shuddered again. Sarah's fighter-pilot instincts, honed by thousands of hours anticipating catastrophic mechanical failure at supersonic speeds, screamed a single word: wrong. She sat up straighter, her hand instinctively reaching for a control stick that wasn't there. The veteran beside her stirred but didn't wake. Through her window, she could see the wing flexing, normal enough in turbulence, but something about the motion seemed off. The flaps were steady. The engine nacelle showed no visible damage or smoke, but that sound. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some light chop. The flight attendant's voice came through the speakers, professionally calm. Too calm. Sarah had heard that exact tone before, from her own wingman, right before he'd had to eject over the Persian Gulf. Please return to your seats and ensure your seatbelts are fastened. The seatbelt sign dinged on. Around her, passengers exchanged glances, some nervous, most merely annoyed at the interruption. The businessman swore under his breath and closed his laptop. The mother reflexively checked her twins' seatbelts, her hand lingering protectively on their shoulders. Then the coffee cart broke loose. It happened fast. One moment, a flight attendant was securing the cart in the galley. The next, the plane lurched hard left and the cart shot down the aisle like a missile, wheels screaming against the carpet. It slammed into row 15 with a metallic crunch. Coffee pots shattered. Cups and napkins exploded into the air. A woman screamed. Jesus Christ! The businessman threw his arms up as hot coffee sprayed past his row. The plane didn't level out. It stayed tilted, maybe 5 degrees, not enough to be dangerous, but enough to be very, very wrong. Commercial aircraft didn't fly crooked. Not like this. Not without immediate correction. Sarah's heart rate spiked. She unbuckled her seatbelt. "Ma'am, please remain seated." A flight attendant, young, maybe 23, with blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun, was making her way up the aisle, gripping seat backs for balance. Her professional mask was cracking. Sarah could see it in the tightness around her eyes, the way her fingers clutched too hard at the fabric. "What's happening?" an elderly woman in row 10 asked, her voice quavering. "Just some unexpected turbulence. Everything's under control." But it wasn't. Sarah knew it wasn't. The plane's behavior was all wrong. The tilt, the vibration, the fact that they weren't correcting course. Then came the sound that changed everything. Boom! Muffled from somewhere forward. Not an explosion. Sarah had heard plenty of those. This was blunt, heavy, like something large and solid hitting something else large and solid. The intercom clicked on. Static. Then a voice, male, young, shaking. "Captain, Captain, can you hear me?" More static. "Captain Williams, sir." The intercom clicked off. For 3 heartbeats, the cabin was absolutely silent, every passenger frozen, every eye turned toward the cockpit door. Then chaos erupted. "Oh my God, something's wrong with the pilot. Are we crashing?" "Mommy," one of the twins started crying. The blonde flight attendant's face went white. She practically ran toward the cockpit, no longer pretending to be calm. Another flight attendant, an older man with graying temples, emerged from the rear galley and followed, his jaw set. Sarah was already moving. "Ma'am, you need to sit down." Another flight attendant, this one barely out of her teens, tried to block Sarah's path. Her name tag read Jennifer. She looked terrified. "I'm military, F-16 pilot." Sarah's voice cut through the rising panic with command authority. "Let me through." Jennifer hesitated, then stepped aside. Sarah reached the front of the cabin just as the blonde flight attendant, her name tag said Amanda, pushed the cockpit door open. Through the gap, Sarah glimpsed the interior. The captain was slumped forward against his harness, head lolled to one side. Even from here, Sarah could see the unnatural gray pallor of his skin, the way his hand was clutched against his chest. His fingers twitched weakly. The first officer, a young man who looked fresh out of flight school, with dark hair and wide, panicked eyes, had one hand on the control yoke and the other reaching across to shake the captain's shoulder. "Captain, sir, please," his voice cracked. "Somebody help." The male flight attendant, his tag read Marcus, pushed past Sarah. "I'm CPR certified, let me." "There's no room." Amanda's voice was rising toward hysteria. "We can't get to him with the controls." The plane lurched again, harder this time. The nose dipped. Someone in the cabin screamed. Sarah grabbed the doorframe to keep from falling. The first officer was yanking back on the yoke, his movements jerky, overcorrected. The plane leveled out, but he was fighting it. Sweat poured down his face. "I can't, I've never." He looked up, saw the crowd in the doorway, and his eyes locked on Sarah. She saw something in that look that chilled her blood, pure, absolute terror. "He always does the landing. Always. I've only done 3 solo landings, and that was in perfect weather and—" "How long have you been flying?" Sarah heard herself ask. 180 hours. His voice was barely a whisper. "I got certified 6 weeks ago." Behind her, someone in the cabin was praying loudly in Spanish. The twins were both wailing now. The businessman was on his phone trying to get a signal, shouting, "We're going down," to whoever he thought might hear. Amanda grabbed the PA microphone with shaking hands. For a moment she just stood there, finger on the button, unable to speak. Then she pressed it. "Ladies and gentlemen," her voice cracked. She took a breath, tried again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we need to remain calm. Is there a pilot on board? We need a pilot. If anyone has flight experience, please identify yourself immediately." The announcement echoed through the cabin. Conversation stopped. Prayers paused. Everyone looked around. Sarah felt every eye in first class turned toward her. The veteran in 8B had woken up. He met her gaze across the cabin, and she saw understanding dawn in those pale blue eyes. He'd heard her tell him she was a fighter pilot. He knew. He gave her a single, sharp nod. Sarah looked back into the cockpit. The first officer was hyperventilating now, his chest heaving. The captain's hand had stopped twitching. Marcus was trying to unbuckle him to start CPR, but the space was too cramped, and they couldn't risk moving him while the plane was in the air. On the instrument panel, warning lights were starting to blink. Sarah's trained eye picked them out. Hydraulic pressure, fuel imbalance, autopilot disconnect. "Please," the first officer looked at her with desperate hope. "Can you fly?" Sarah's mouth went dry. She'd flown F-16s. Sleek, responsive fighters that could do a barrel roll at 500 miles per hour. She'd never even been in the cockpit of a commercial aircraft. They were completely different controls, different systems, different physics. It would be like asking a Formula One driver to operate a freight train. But she looked past him, through the cockpit window at the instruments, and did the calculation every pilot learns to do in milliseconds. Probability of success versus probability of catastrophic failure. With her, maybe 60% chance they land safely. Without her, 20% at best. Behind her, a child was crying, "Mommy, I'm scared." Sarah thought of her father's dog tags, warm against her chest. She thought of the letter waiting for her, the one that might end her career. She thought of that convoy in Afghanistan, the split-second decision that had put her here. All her training, all her experience, all the risks she'd taken, they'd been building to this moment. She stepped into the cockpit. "I'm Major Sarah Chen, United States Air Force. I have over 3,000 flight hours." She slid into the jump seat behind the first officer, her eyes already scanning the instrument panel, trying to make sense of the unfamiliar layout. "What's your name?" "Rodriguez, Jake Rodriguez." He was still gripping the yoke like it might escape. "Okay, Jake, here's what's going to happen. You're going to teach me how to fly this plane, and you're going to do it fast. Can you do that?" He stared at her. "You've never flown a 737. Never. But you can learn." Sarah thought about every emergency she'd ever faced. Engine failure over the Pacific. Hydraulic failure over Baghdad. That time her radar went out during a nighttime intercept and she'd had to navigate by stars. "I'm a very fast learner," she said. The plane dropped suddenly, 500 feet in 2 seconds. The stall warning alarm began to scream. The stall warning shrieked through the cockpit, a piercing electronic wail that meant the plane was losing lift, about to fall from the sky like a brick. "Pull up, pull up," the automated voice blared from the instrument panel. Rodriguez yanked back on the yoke with both hands, his knuckles bone white. The plane's nose lifted, but sluggishly, fighting him every inch. "Not too fast," Sarah's hand shot out, covering his on the controls. "Easy, smooth inputs. You yank it, you'll send us into a stall spin." He eased back and Sarah felt the plane respond, the deck angle increasing, the altitude loss slowing. The warning stopped screaming. Her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat, but her hands were steady. "Good," she said, keeping her voice level. "That's good, Jake. Now bring us back to straight and level, small movements." Behind them, Marcus had finally managed to unbuckle Captain Williams and ease him onto the cockpit floor. The space was impossibly tight. Williams' legs were still partially under the control panel. Marcus began chest compressions, counting under his breath. Amanda squeezed in beside him, her hands shaking as she prepared the portable defibrillator from the emergency medical kit. Sarah blocked it out. Had to. She couldn't help the captain now. Her job was keeping the other 183 people aboard alive. She scanned the instrument panel, a bewildering array of screens, switches, and displays that looked nothing like her F-16's heads-up display. In her fighter, everything was designed for speed and intuition. This was like reading a foreign language written in 3 different alphabets. "Jake, I need you to talk me through these instruments. Start with airspeed and altitude." Rodriguez pointed with a trembling finger. "Primary flight display, that's your artificial horizon, airspeed on the left, altitude on the right. We're at 34,500 feet, speed 280 knots. Navigation. That screen," he indicated the display between them, "shows our course, waypoints, weather radar." Sarah's eyes found the weather radar and her stomach dropped. A massive red and yellow blob stretched across their route, the storm system they'd been trying to skirt, and they were heading straight into it. "We need to contact ATC. Now." She reached for the radio panel, then stopped. "Which frequency?" "It's already set, 124.75. Just press the button on the yoke." Sarah found the push-to-talk button and keyed it. "Sacramento Center, United 447, declaring an emergency." Static, then a male voice, crisp and professional. "United 447, Sacramento Center, go ahead." "Center 447 is declaring medical emergency. Captain is incapacitated, possible cardiac arrest. First officer is inexperienced." She shot Rodriguez an apologetic look. "I'm a military pilot assuming command, but I'm unfamiliar with aircraft type. Request priority handling and weather vectors." There was a pause, a long one. Sarah could almost hear the controller's brain trying to process what she just said. 447, say again, military pilot. Affirmative, Major Sarah Chen, U.S. Air Force, F-16 combat pilot, 3,000 flight hours but not in commercial aircraft. She kept her voice steady, authoritative, the voice she used when calling in airstrikes. "I need guidance, Center. What's my best option?" Another pause, then, "Standby 447. Behind her the defibrillator charged with a high-pitched whine. "Clear," Marcus's voice. A thump. William's body jerked. Sarah forced herself not to turn around. "No pulse," Amanda said, voice breaking. "Again, charging." The radio crackled back to life. 447, Sacramento Center. Be advised, San Francisco International is IFR, visibility 1/4 mile in fog. We're vectoring you to Sacramento International. Current weather. Wind 190 at 15, gusting to 25, ceiling 800 feet, light rain. Runway 16R is available, 8,600 feet. Sarah did the mental math. Sacramento was their best bet, closest airport with a long enough runway and semi-decent weather, but that crosswind. 447 copies Sacramento. Request vectors. 447. Turn left heading 20. Descend and maintain flight level 300. Rodriguez was already reaching for the controls when Sarah stopped him. Talk me through it first. Every step. Okay, he swallowed hard. Heading, you turn this dial on the mode control panel. He indicated a panel above the main displays. That sets the autopilot heading. Then you push this button to engage heading select. Autopilot's still working. For now, but for landing, his voice trailed off. We'll deal with landing when we get there. What about descent? This dial, altitude selector. Dial down to 30,000, then pull to engage. The plane will descend automatically at standard rate. Sarah followed his instructions, her fingers finding the dials. The plane banked left smoothly, more smoothly than any input she'd ever made. In her F-16, she felt every adjustment through the stick. This was like driving by remote control. Clear, the defibrillator again, another thump. Sarah gritted her teeth. Turn complete, Rodriguez said. We're on heading 20, descending to flight level 300. Sarah keyed the radio. Center, 447 is turning 20, leaving 345 for 300. 447, Roger. Sacramento International is 180 miles ahead. Be advised, we're working on getting a commercial pilot on frequency to talk you through approach and landing. Thank God. Sarah felt a tiny bit of tension ease, but then Rodriguez said something that brought it roaring back. Major, we have another problem. She looked at him. His face had gone even paler, if that was possible. He was staring at one of the displays. Fuel, we're lower than we should be. Sarah found the fuel gauge. Each wing tank showed levels, and there was a totalizer. Her combat training kicked in. She dealt with fuel emergencies before, had to calculate range to the nearest tanker or friendly airbase more times than she could count. But those calculations had been for a fighter jet burning 800 pounds of fuel per minute in afterburner. This lumbering giant had different math she didn't know. What's our consumption rate? At this altitude and speed, about 5,000 pounds per hour total. Rodriguez's fingers flew over a keyboard, pulling up a page of data. We should have 18,000 pounds remaining. We have 14,500. Where did 3,500 pounds go? I don't know, maybe the storm, we were pushed off course, had to take a longer route. Or maybe, he looked sick, maybe there's a leak, a slow one, not enough to trigger alarms, but how much do we need to reach Sacramento with reserves? He calculated, his lips moving. Minimum, 8,000 pounds. That gives us normal reserves plus emergency. Sarah did the math. They had 14,500 pounds. Sacramento was 180 miles away. At their current descent rate and speed, that was maybe 35 minutes of flight time. 35 minutes at 5,000 pounds per hour was. We'll have about 11,500 pounds when we arrive, she said. That's enough. Barely. If we have to go around, if we miss the approach, we won't have fuel for a second attempt. The words hung in the cockpit like a death sentence. One chance, one landing, get it right or die trying. Behind them, Marcus stopped compressions. He's got a pulse, weak, thready, but it's there. Small mercies. At least Williams had a chance. The plane shuddered as they entered the outer edge of the storm system. Rain began to streak across the windscreen. Lightning flashed somewhere to their left, turning the clouds purple-white. Sarah's hands found the yoke, not the autopilot controls, the actual yoke in front of her jump seat. It was connected to Rodriguez's. When he moved, hers moved. She wrapped her fingers around it, feeling the slight vibrations, the almost imperceptible inputs the autopilot was making. This was what she'd trained for. Not this exactly, never this, but the essence of it. The unknown emergency, the impossible situation, the moment when training and instinct were all you had between life and death. "Jake," she said quietly, "I need you to teach me everything about landing this plane. We have 35 minutes. Start talking." He looked at her and something shifted in his eyes. He'd been drowning and she'd thrown him a rope. Now he had a job, a purpose, something to focus on besides his own terror. "Okay." He pulled out a laminated card, quick reference checklist. "Approach and landing procedures. First, you need to understand." The radio interrupted. "United 447, Sacramento Center. We have Captain Mike Donnelly on frequency, retired airline pilot, 25,000 hours in type. He's going to walk you through this." A new voice came through, older, calm, with the kind of unshakable confidence that came from decades in the cockpit. 447, this is Captain Donnelly. I understand we have a unique situation here. Major Chen, is it? Affirmative, Captain. Well, Major, I've talked a few people through emergency landings before. Never had a fighter pilot, though. That's new. How you holding up? Sarah surprised herself by almost smiling. I've had better days, sir. I bet. Okay, here's the situation. You've got one shot at this. Fuel won't give you a second chance. Weather's not great, but I've seen worse. The 737 is a forgiving bird. She wants to fly, wants to land. Your job is just not to get in her way. Can you do that? Sarah looked at the instrument panel, at the storm ahead, at Rodriguez beside her already pulling out approach charts. She thought of the passengers behind her, the twins, their mother, the businessman, the veteran who'd saluted her. Yes, sir, I can do that. Good, then let's get started. Jake, you reading me too? Yes, Captain Donnelly. Outstanding, you two are going to be a team. Jake knows the plane, Major knows how to stay cool under fire. Together, you've got this. Now let's talk about approach speeds. Sarah listened, her mind cataloging every detail, every number, every procedure. She'd absorbed tactical briefings in 90 seconds before combat missions. She'd memorized emergency procedures for 17 different system failures. She could do this. She had to. Because 183 people were depending on her, and the runway at Sacramento was getting closer with every passing second. Thing you need to understand, Major, forget everything you know about fighter jets. Captain Donnelly's voice crackled through Sarah's headset as she stared at the bewildering array of instruments. Outside the windscreen, rain hammered the glass in sheets. Lightning flickered through the clouds like camera flashes at a disaster. A 737 doesn't want to be thrown around, Donnelly continued. She's a lady, not a fighter. Smooth inputs, gentle hands. You pull 3 GS in this bird, you'll rip the wings off. Understood. Sarah flexed her fingers on the yoke. In her F-16, she could slam the stick to one side and execute a 9G turn that would leave most pilots unconscious. Here, she had to think like she was flying a freight train made of eggshells. Rodriguez had spread approach charts across his lap, his finger tracing their route. We're going to be coming in on the ILS approach to runway 16R, that's the instrument landing system. Basically, the autopilot can follow radio beams all the way down to 200 feet. Can't we just let the autopilot land? Negative, Donnelly cut in. Autoland requires special certification, specific equipment. This bird isn't equipped for it. Below 200 feet, you're hand-flying, Major. That's where you earn your paycheck. Sarah's jaw tightened. Of course, nothing could be easy. Jake, Donnelly said, pull up the approach plate for Sacramento 16R, Major. You need to memorize this. Rodriguez tapped at the display screen between them, and a complex diagram appeared. Lines, numbers, altitudes, frequencies. It looked like a cross between a topographical map and a calculus equation. "This is your roadmap," Rodriguez explained, his voice steadier now that he had a task. "We intercept the localizer here. That's the horizontal guidance. At this point, we're at 4,000 feet. The glide slope intercepts here at 3,200 feet. That's your vertical guidance, 3-degree descent angle all the way to the runway." Sarah's eyes traced the path, waypoint to waypoint, altitude restrictions, minimum speeds. Her brain cataloged it all, but there was so much she didn't know. "What's my target speed on final?" "Depends on landing weight. We're heavy full passenger load, but we've burned fuel." Rodriguez worked his keyboard. "I'm calculating. Target speed 145 knots with flaps 40. Flaps. Wing surfaces that extend to give you more lift at slower speeds. You'll configure them gradually during approach. Flaps 1, then 5, then 15, then 30, then 40 at different altitudes and speeds." Sarah's head spun. In her F-16 she had 2 wing positions, combat and landing. That was it. This plane had more settings than a Swiss watch. "Major, stay with me," Donnelly's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. "I know it's a lot. Focus on the big picture. You're going to fly the plane to 200 feet using instruments and autopilot. Then you take over manually and put it on the ground. Everything else, the flaps, the speed, the configuration, Jake's going to handle. You're just flying. That's what you do, right?" "Right," Sarah took a breath. He was right. Strip away the complexity and it was just flying. Point A to point B, then put the wheels on the ground without breaking anything. The plane bucked as they hit heavier turbulence. The autopilot compensated, but Sarah felt it through the yoke, the constant tiny adjustments, the machine fighting to keep them stable. "How's our fuel?" she asked. Rodriguez checked. His face tightened. 13,800 pounds. We're burning faster than calculated, probably fighting headwinds from the storm. Sarah did the math. They'd burned 700 pounds in the last 10 minutes. At that rate, "We'll be at minimums when we reach Sacramento," Rodriguez said quietly. "Maybe 9,000 pounds. Enough to land with emergency reserves, but no margin for error," Sarah finished. "No second chances. No go-around. They had to nail this on the first try, or they'd be attempting an emergency landing in a field with empty tanks." "Major Chen." It was Amanda's voice behind her, tight with strain. "The passengers, they're panicking. What do I tell them?" Sarah turned. Amanda's mascara had run down her cheeks. Marcus was still on the floor with Captain Williams monitoring his pulse. The captain's color was better, no longer gray but ashen. Alive, barely. "Tell them the truth," Sarah said. "We have the situation under control. We're diverting to Sacramento, landing in about 25 minutes. Tell them to follow all instructions from the flight crew." "But what if they ask about the pilot?" "Tell them a qualified pilot is flying the aircraft," which is true. Sarah held Amanda's gaze. "They need to see you calm. Can you do that?" Amanda straightened, wiped her face, nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "Good, get Williams stabilized and secured. Then prepare the cabin for landing. Emergency procedures, brace positions, everything." Amanda disappeared into the cabin. Through the open cockpit door, Sarah could hear the chaos, people crying, praying, demanding answers. She caught a glimpse of the veteran from 8B. He was standing in the aisle, talking to the mother with the twins, his hand on her shoulder, calming her, helping. United 447, Sacramento approach. Descend and maintain 10,000 feet. Reduce speed to 250 knots. Rodriguez was already adjusting the autopilot. "Speed brakes," he said, reaching for a lever. "This helps us slow down without pitching the nose down too much." Sarah watched him work, memorizing every movement. She had to be able to do this herself if something happened to him. "Major," Donnelly's voice again, "let's talk about what happens if things go wrong. If you come in too high or too fast, you can't land, you'll overshoot the runway. If you come in too low or too slow, you'll stall and crash before you reach it. The window for success is narrow. How narrow? Plus or minus 5 knots on airspeed, plus or minus 50 feet on altitude. At 200 feet, you need to be on speed, on glide slope and stable. If you're not, you have to go around. But we don't have fuel for. I know, but if you're not stable, you can't land. You'll crash trying. Sometimes the only option is a bad option. Sarah's hands tightened on the yoke. A bad option, like the choice she'd made in Afghanistan: break the rules and save lives, or follow orders and watch people die. She'd chosen to break the rules. Here, the rules of physics couldn't be broken. Understood, Captain. We'll be stable. Ata girl, now let's talk about crosswinds. For the next 15 minutes, Donnelly walked her through every scenario. Crosswind landing techniques: crab into the wind, then kick it straight at the last second. Hydroplaning risks on a wet runway. Brake application: steady, not poolsing like in a car. Reverse thrust: when to deploy, how much to use. Rodriguez fed her information constantly. Hydraulic systems: we have 3, A, B, and standby. Brakes run on A and B. If we lose hydraulics, we have manual brakes, but they're much less effective. Engine restart procedures in case of flameout. The runway has ILS markers: outer marker at 5 miles, middle marker at half mile. Sarah absorbed it all, her mind racing. Too much information, not enough time. But she'd been trained for this, not this exactly, but the concept. Drinking from a fire hose, making life-or-death decisions with incomplete information. United 447, Sacramento approach. Turn left heading 160, descend and maintain 5,000. You're 40 miles from the field. 447 turning 160, leaving 10,000 for 5,000. 40 miles, maybe 12 minutes. Sarah's heart hammered. Outside, the storm raged. The plane shook and shuddered. Rain obscured the windscreen except when the wipers swept across. Brief moments of clarity, then back to chaos. Jake, Sarah said quietly, I need you to know something. If we don't make this. Don't, his voice was sharp. Don't say it, we're making this. You saved my ass already, kept me from stalling us out. Now I'm going to save yours. I'm going to get you to that runway and you're going to land us. Deal. Sarah looked at him. This kid who'd been terrified 20 minutes ago, who'd found his courage somewhere in the chaos. Deal. United 447. You're cleared for the ILS approach runway 16R contact tower on 118.7. Rodriguez changed frequencies. Sacramento Tower, United 447 with you, cleared ILS 16R. United 447, Sacramento Tower. Wind 190 at 18, gusting 28. Runway 16R, cleared to land. Emergency equipment is standing by. Cleared to land. The words that meant they were committed now, no turning back. Sarah's hands found the yoke again. She could feel the plane through it, alive, struggling against the weather, trusting her to bring it home. Flaps 1, Rodriguez called, moving a lever. The plane shuddered as the flaps extended slightly. Localizer alive, he said, watching his instruments. We're tracking center line. On the navigation display, Sarah saw a magenta line, their path to the runway. They were on it, the autopilot following it perfectly. For now. Glide slope alive, beginning descent. The nose dipped slightly. The altimeter started unwinding. 4,800 feet, 4,500, 4,200. Major, Donnelly said, his voice serious now, in about 8 minutes you're going to take control of that aircraft. 35 years I've been flying and I can tell you, the last 200 feet of every landing is where you find out what you're made of. You've got the training. You've got the instincts. Trust them. Sarah closed her eyes for just a second, felt her father's dog tags against her chest. Fear is just your body preparing to do something brave. She opened her eyes. I'm ready, she said. The storm swallowed them whole. The storm hit them like a fist. One moment they were in clouds, thick, gray, turbulent but manageable. The next, the world outside exploded into violence. Wind shear slammed the plane sideways. Rain didn't fall, it attacked horizontally, turning the windscreen into a wall of water. Lightning split the sky so close Sarah saw the afterimage burned into her retinas. Jesus! Rodriguez grabbed his armrest as the plane dropped 20 feet in a second. The autopilot fought to compensate, but Sarah could feel it struggling through the yoke. The controls bucked in her hands like a living thing trying to escape. Airspeed fluctuating, Rodriguez's voice climbed an octave. 160, 145, 170. That's wind shear. Sarah's combat training kicked in. She'd flown through worse, sandstorms over Iraq where visibility dropped to zero, thunderstorms over the Pacific that turned her F-16 into a pinball. The autopilot can handle it. Let it work. But even as she said it, warning lights began to flash. Master caution. Hydraulic pressure fluctuation. The plane shook so violently her teeth rattled. United 447, Sacramento Tower, showing you 15 miles out. How are you handling the weather? Rodriguez keyed the mic, but his voice betrayed him. Tower, it's rough, really rough. Sarah took the radio. Tower 447, weather is challenging but manageable, continuing approach. Lie with confidence, her first flight instructor had taught her. The plane believes you. The crew believes you. Make them all believe you've got this, even when you're terrified. Especially when you're terrified. Flaps 5, Rodriguez called, hands moving across controls with growing confidence. The flaps extended further with a hydraulic whine Sarah felt through her feet. Glide slope captured, we're on the beam. He pointed at his display. See this, 2 needles forming a cross, we want to keep them centered, that's our path to the runway. Sarah studied it. In her F-16, she'd had a heads-up display that painted targeting information directly onto her visor. This was more primitive, but the concept was the same. Follow the needles, stay on the path. Speed 180 knots, flaps 15. More shaking, more wind. The plane yawed right and the autopilot corrected, then left, then right again. They were being thrown around like a toy. Major Chen, Donnelly's voice cut through the chaos. What's your altitude? Rodriguez answered, 3,200 feet, 10 miles out. Okay, you're doing good. At 2,500 feet, you're going to configure flaps 30 and extend your landing gear. That's going to slow you down significantly and change how the plane handles. You'll feel it drop. That's normal. Don't panic. Behind them from the cabin, Sarah heard a crash. Screams. Then Amanda's voice trying to sound calm. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We're just experiencing some weather. Sarah glanced back. Through the cockpit door she saw chaos. Overhead bins had popped open, spilling bags and coats. The businessman from first class was gripping his armrest so hard his knuckles were white. The mother with the twins had both children clutched to her chest, her face pressed against their hair. And the veteran from 8B was watching the cockpit with an expression Sarah recognized. She'd seen it on her squadron commander's face during her first combat mission, concern mixed with faith. He believed in her. She couldn't let him down. 2,500 feet, Rodriguez announced. Flaps 30, landing gear coming down. He moved a large lever shaped like a wheel. Mechanical sounds echoed through the airframe, doors opening, gear extending, locks engaging. Green lights illuminated on the panel. The plane's nose pitched down sharply. Sarah's hands instinctively grabbed the yoke, though the autopilot was still engaged. Every fiber of her fighter pilot training screamed that they were falling, that she needed to pull up, that this descent angle was wrong. That's normal, Rodriguez said quickly, seeing her reaction. Gear creates drag. We're configured for landing now. Speed dropping to 145 knots. The turbulence seemed worse now, or maybe it was just that the plane was more vulnerable, slower, heavier, less maneuverable. Each gust hit them like a hammer. 8 miles, altitude 2,000 feet. Rodriguez's voice was mechanical now, falling into the rhythm of the approach. Approach checklist complete. Landing checklist, flaps 40. The final flap setting. The plane slowed further, settling into its landing configuration. Sarah felt the difference. More drag, more stability, but also more vulnerable to wind. United 447 Tower, showing you 7 miles, runway in sight. Sarah peered through the windscreen. Rain, lightning, darkness, nothing else. Negative Tower, we're IMC. Instrument meteorological conditions, flying blind. Roger 447. Runway environment should be visible around 500 feet. You're cleared to land, wind now 200 at 22, gusting 32. The crosswind had gotten worse. Sarah's mind raced through Donnelly's instructions. Crab into the wind. Keep the nose pointed at the runway center line. Then at the last second kick the rudder to straighten out. 1,500 feet, Rodriguez called. Still on glide slope. Speed 145 knots, right on target. Major, Donnelly's voice was quieter now, intimate. In about 90 seconds you're going to disconnect the autopilot and take control. When you do, the plane's going to feel heavy. Mushy. Don't over-control, small inputs. The plane wants to land, just guide it. Sarah flexed her fingers. In 90 seconds, 183 lives would depend entirely on her hands. 1,000 feet, speed good, sink rate good. Rodriguez was in the zone now, his fear transmuted into focus. Major, at 500 feet, I'm going to call out altitudes every 100 feet. At 200 feet, you're taking over. Understood. Thunder boomed so close the plane shook. Lightning illuminated the cockpit like a flashbulb. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. 800 feet. The altimeter unwound. They were dropping into the soup, blind, trusting instruments and radio beams to guide them to a runway they couldn't see in conditions that would ground most pilots. 700 feet. Sarah's hands wrapped around the yoke. Her feet found the rudder pedals, massive compared to her F-16s, requiring more force to move. 600 feet, still on glide slope. Her mouth was dry. Sweat trickled down her spine despite the air conditioning. 500 feet. Through the storm, through the rain, through the chaos, a glimpse. Lights, faint, impossibly small, but there. Runway lights cutting through the darkness like a path to salvation. Runway in sight, Sarah said. 400 feet. The lights grew. The runway took shape, a black strip between twin rows of white lights, slick with rain, disappearing into sheets of water. 300 feet. Rodriguez's hand hovered over the autopilot disconnect. Ready, Major. Sarah took a breath. This was it. Everything, all her training, all her experience, her father's legacy, the lives of everyone on board, came down to the next 60 seconds. Ready. 200 feet, autopilot disconnect, you have control. Rodriguez pressed the button. A warning tone sounded. And suddenly, the plane was in Sarah Chen's hands. The yoke came alive in Sarah's hands. After 20 minutes of feeling the autopilot's artificial inputs, the sudden rush of direct control was overwhelming. Every gust, every wind shear, every raindrop's impact, she felt it all. The plane wasn't flying itself anymore. It was an extension of her body, and that body was being beaten by the storm. The crosswind hit immediately. The nose swung right, pushed by the 32-knot gusts. Sarah's right hand moved instinctively, too fast, too much fighter-pilot reflexes, and the plane overcorrected left. Easy, Rodriguez's voice cracked. Small inputs. Sarah forced herself to relax her death grip, gentle pressure. The nose came back to centerline. She had to fight every instinct, every reflex honed by 3,000 hours in a fighter jet. This wasn't about aggressive maneuvering. This was about finesse. 150 feet, airspeed 145, you're high on glide slope. High, she was above the ideal descent path. Sarah pushed the yoke forward, just a fraction, and the nose dipped. The runway lights rushed closer. Better, 140 feet. The wind shoved them right again. Sarah compensated with the rudder, pushing left, keeping the nose pointed at the runway while the plane's body drifted sideways through the air. It felt wrong, looked wrong, but Donnelly's voice echoed in her mind. Crab into the wind until the last second. 130 feet, sink rate good. Through the rain-streaked windscreen, Sarah could see the runway clearly now. It looked impossibly narrow, impossibly short, nothing like the massive concrete expanses she'd landed on in fighters. And it was moving, or they were moving, sideways, the crosswind pushing them toward the edge. 120 feet, airspeed 143. A little fast. Sarah pulled back the throttles slightly. In her F-16, she'd had direct control of the afterburners. Here, the engines responded sluggishly, a delayed reaction that made her want to scream. 110 feet. The plane bucked. A wind shear caught them pushing down. The sink rate spiked. They were falling too fast. Power, Rodriguez shouted. Sarah jammed the throttles forward. The engine spooled up too slowly, always too slowly, and the descent slowed. But now they were low below the glide slope. 100 feet, you're low, you're low. The approach lights rushed at them, red and white markers that meant they were off path. Sarah pulled back on the yoke, raising the nose, trading airspeed for altitude. The stall warning chirped once, a reminder that she was dancing on the edge. 90 feet, sink rate correcting. Her arms ached. Her hands were locked on the controls so tight her fingers had gone numb. Sweat poured down her face, stinging her eyes. 80 feet. The runway filled the windscreen now. She could see individual lights, see the rain bouncing off the concrete, see the white centerline stripe. 70 feet. In the cabin behind her, Amanda's voice rang out. Brace, brace, heads down, stay down. 60 feet. You're doing good, Major, you're doing good. The wind hit them again hard. The right wing dipped 20 degrees. Sarah's left hand slammed the yoke right while her feet worked the rudders. The plane leveled, but they drifted. They were off centerline, tracking toward the right edge of the runway. 50 feet, you're right of center. Sarah banked left, bringing them back. Too much. Now they were tracking left. She corrected. The plane wobbled, unstable, fighting her and the wind and physics itself. 40 feet. This was it, the moment. Sarah kicked the right rudder hard, straightening the nose, no longer crabbing but aligned with the runway. The plane's body swung, the wings rocked, and for one terrifying instant she thought they were going to cartwheel. But the nose held, they were straight. 30 feet, throttles idle. Sarah's left hand yanked the throttles all the way back. The engine noise dropped. They were falling now, committed, no more adjustments possible. 20 feet. The runway rushed up. She could see every crack in the concrete, every puddle of standing water. 10 feet. Sarah pulled back on the yoke, flaring, raising the nose, trying to bleed off speed and let the rear wheels touch first. Too much and they'd balloon back into the air. Too little and they'd slam down nose first. 5 feet. In seat 8B, the veteran from the Navy whispered words he'd spoken 40 years ago over the skis of Vietnam. Come on, girl, kiss it gentle. Sarah held the yoke back, waiting for the moment of contact, praying she judged it right. The main landing gear hit. Hard. The impact jolted through the entire aircraft. Somewhere in the cabin, someone screamed. The nose gear was still in the air, and Sarah held it there, aerodynamic braking, bleeding off speed. Then the nose came down. The gear touched, grabbed, and suddenly they were rolling, on the ground, alive. Thrust reversers. Rodriguez's hands flew to the levers between them, pulling them up and back. The engine noise changed to a roar as the thrust reversed, helping to slow them. Sarah's feet found the brake pedals and pressed, steady, even pressure like Donnelly taught her. Not too hard, not too soft. The plane shuddered, decelerating, but they were still going fast. Too fast. And the runway was running out. Through the rain, Sarah saw the yellow distance markers flashing past. 6,000 feet remaining. 5,000. 4,000. They needed to be stopped by the time those numbers hit zero, or they'd run off the end into the grass, the drainage ditch, and God knew what else. Come on, Rodriguez muttered, his eyes locked on the airspeed indicator. 3,000 feet remaining. Sarah pressed the brakes harder. She could smell them now, that acrid burning smell of brake pads pushed to their limit. The plane was groaning, every rivet and bolt protesting. 2,000 feet remaining. The speed was dropping, 100 knots, 90-80. 1,000 feet remaining. We're not going to make it, Rodriguez's voice pitched up. But Sarah felt it, the subtle shift in momentum, the way the deceleration was winning. Her fighter pilot instincts, honed by 1,000 arrested landings on practice runs, told her they had it. 500 feet remaining. 60 knots, 50-40. The plane was slowing now, really slowing, the brakes doing their job despite the standing water. 300 feet. 30 knots, 25-20. 200 feet. And then, with just 180 feet of runway remaining, the Boeing 737 groaned to a complete stop. For 3 heartbeats, nobody moved, nobody spoke, nobody breathed. The only sound was the rain hammering on the fuselage and the clicking of cooling engines. Then the cabin exploded. Applause, cheering, crying, screaming, people laughing and sobbing at the same time. The businessman was on his knees in the aisle. The mother was kissing her twins' heads over and over, tears streaming down her face. Rodriguez turned to Sarah, his face pale and sweaty, and said, Holy shit, you did it. You actually did it." Sarah sat frozen, her hands still locked on the yoke, her body trembling with adrenaline she could no longer contain. The radio crackled. United 447, Sacramento Tower. Welcome to Sacramento. That was. Jesus Christ, that was the best piece of flying I've seen in 30 years. Through the cockpit door, Sarah saw the veteran from 8B standing in the aisle. He caught her eye and brought his hand up in a crisp, perfect military salute. Sarah's vision blurred with tears she couldn't stop. They were down, they were safe. She'd brought them home. Sarah's hands wouldn't release the yoke. Her fingers had locked around it during the landing, tendons and muscles frozen in position, and now her brain couldn't seem to send the signal to let go. She stared at them, her own hands, white-knuckled and trembling, as if they belonged to someone else. "Major," Rodriguez's voice seemed to come from far away. "Major Chen, we need to taxi." Taxi? Right. They were stopped in the middle of the runway. Emergency vehicles surrounded them, fire trucks with lights flashing red and blue through the rain, ambulances, ground crew vehicles. But they couldn't stay here. Sarah forced her fingers to open, one at a time. The yoke released from her grip, leaving deep red impressions in her palms. Tower 447, her voice cracked. She cleared her throat, tried again. Request progressive taxi to the gate. 447, follow the emergency vehicles. They'll guide you in, take your time, you've earned it. Rodriguez handled the taxi, his hands steady on the tiller. Sarah slumped back in the jump seat, suddenly aware of how much her entire body ached. Her shoulders burned. Her legs felt like jelly. The adrenaline that had kept her sharp and focused was draining away, leaving her hollow. Behind them, Marcus had oxygen on Captain Williams. "He's stable," Marcus said, his voice thick with relief. "Pulse is stronger. Paramedics are meeting us at the gate." The plane crept forward at walking speed, following the flashing lights of the lead vehicle. Through the windscreen, Sarah could see ground crew members standing in the rain, watching them pass. One by one, they began to applaud. Then more joined, then more. Dozens of them lined the taxiway, clapping, some with hands over their hearts, some wiping tears from their eyes. Airport workers who'd probably seen thousands of routine landings had stopped everything to watch this one arrive. "They're applauding," Rodriguez whispered, his voice breaking. "For us, for you." Sarah couldn't speak. Her throat was too tight. The gate came into view, A7, with a jetway already extending to meet them. Paramedics waited beside it with gurneys and equipment. Airline officials in suits huddled under umbrellas. And cameras, news cameras. Someone had leaked the story fast. Rodriguez parked the plane with practiced precision, despite his shaking hands. Parking brakes set, engines shutting down. The familiar whine of the engines spooling down filled the cockpit. That sound that meant journey's end, safety, home. Sarah unbuckled and stood on legs that barely held her. She had to grip the back of Rodriguez's seat to stay upright. The cockpit door burst open and Amanda rushed in. Mascara streaked down her face and threw her arms around Sarah. "Thank you. Oh my God, thank you. I have 2 kids at home and I thought. "It's okay," Sarah patted her back awkwardly. "It's okay, everyone's safe." Marcus appeared next, gripping Sarah's hand with both of his. "Major, I've been flying for 15 years. 15 years. I've never seen anything like what you just did." But Sarah was looking past them, into the cabin. The passengers were still in their seats, many still crying. The businessman from first class had his face in his hands. The mother was holding her twins so tight they squirmed. And walking up the aisle, moving slowly, carefully, came the veteran from 8B. He reached the cockpit and stopped. Up close, Sarah could see the tears in his pale blue eyes, the tremor in his weathered hands. "Ma'am," he said, his voice rough. "Lieutenant Commander James Morrison, USN, retired. I flew A4 Skyhawks off the Constellation, did 3 tours in Nam." He straightened despite his age. "That landing, that was the finest piece of flying I've ever witnessed. Your daddy would be proud." Sarah's composure shattered. She didn't know how he knew about her father. Maybe her face when she'd mentioned being military. Maybe just the understanding that passed between pilots across generations. But hearing those words broke something open inside her. She wasn't crying. She was sobbing. Great, heaving sobs that she couldn't control, couldn't stop. All the fear, all the pressure, all the weight of knowing that one mistake would have killed 183 people. It poured out of her in a torrent. Morrison pulled her into a hug and she clung to him like a child. "I got you," he said softly. "I got you, girl, let it out." Rodriguez was crying too. Amanda, Marcus, half the passengers who could see into the cockpit. They'd all held it together through the crisis, and now that they were safe, the dam had burst for everyone. The jetway door opened with a hiss. Paramedics rushed on board, heading straight for Williams. Behind them came airline officials, airport security, and Sarah groaned inwardly, a woman with a microphone and a camera crew. Major Chen, a man in a pilot's uniform with 4 stripes, a captain, pushed through the crowd. He was in his 50s, with gray at his temples and command in his bearing. "I'm Captain Mike Donnelly." The voice from the radio. Sarah straightened, tried to compose herself, failed completely. "Sir, I thank you, I couldn't have." "Stop." Donnelly put his hands on her shoulders. "You just did something I've been flying for 35 years and I'm not sure I could have pulled off. F-16 to 737 in a storm with no training. Major, you didn't just land that plane. You landed it better than pilots who have been flying them for decades." Rodriguez helped. We worked together, Rodriguez cut in, stepping beside her. Major Chen flew it, but I gave her the information she needed. We were a team. Damn right you were. Donnelly looked between them. You two just wrote a new chapter in aviation history. The paramedics were loading Williams onto a gurney. One of them called out, "He's conscious. Captain Williams is conscious." A cheer erupted through the cabin. Williams, oxygen mask on his face, reached out a weak hand toward the cockpit. Sarah pushed through the crowd to reach him. "Major," his voice was barely a whisper through the mask. "You saved my life, saved everyone." "Rest, sir, just rest. You're going to be fine." "My grandkids," his eyes filled with tears. "I get to see them again because of you." They wheeled him out, and Sarah watched him go, suddenly aware of how close it had been. Not just to losing the plane, but to a grandfather never making it home, to children losing their mother, to twins growing up without their parent. Major Chen, the airline official, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a tablet tucked under her arm, extended her hand. "Janet Morrison, United Airlines VP of Operations. On behalf of everyone at United, thank you. We'll need to debrief you, of course. The NTSB will want to speak with you. The FAA. But first." She was interrupted by the businessman from first class who'd pushed through to reach Sarah. "I need to tell you something," he said urgently. "I was on my phone when they said to turn it off. I was working on a deal and I was pissed about this flight, pissed about the delay in boarding, about the crying kids, about everything." His voice cracked. "My daughter is 7 years old, 7, and I was going to miss her dance recital tonight because of this important business deal. You just gave me the rest of my life with her. The deal doesn't matter. Nothing matters except—" He couldn't finish. He just grabbed Sarah's hand and held it. One by one, passengers filed past as they deplaned. Most stopped to thank her. Some hugged her. The mother with the twins stopped and said, "They're named Emma and Lily. I want you to know their names. I want you to know who you saved." "Emma and Lily," Sarah repeated, looking at the two small faces peeking at her shyly. "Beautiful names." By the time the cabin emptied, Sarah was emotionally wrung out. Rodriguez stood beside her, looking equally dazed. They'd gone through something extraordinary together, this kid fresh out of training, and the combat pilot who'd never flown commercial. "Rodriguez," Sarah said, "Jake, you held it together in there. A lot of experienced pilots would have fallen apart." "I was falling apart," he admitted. "But you gave me something to focus on, a job to do, and I wasn't alone." He smiled weakly. "I think I might actually be okay at this flying thing, eventually." "Eventually?" Sarah almost laughed. "Kid, you just helped land a crippled aircraft in a storm. I'd say you're more than okay." The news crew was setting up in the jetway. The woman with the microphone was practically vibrating with excitement. This was her career-making story, the fighter pilot who saved United Flight 447. But all Sarah wanted was to sit down, to close her eyes, to process what had just happened. Morrison appeared beside her one more time, pressing something into her hand. His challenge coin, brass, worn smooth with the constellation's emblem. "You earned this," he said simply. Sarah looked at it, then at him. "Sir, I can't." "You can and you will. Pass it on someday to another pilot who does something extraordinary," he smiled. "Though I doubt they'll top what you just did." As he walked away, Sarah closed her fingers around the coin. They'd made it. Against odds that should have been impossible, they'd made it. And somewhere, she thought, her father was watching. Proud, 3 weeks later, Sarah Chen stood at the front of a classroom at Randolph Air Force Base, wearing her flight suit and watching 24 young pilots stare back at her with a mixture of awe and nervousness. The same uniform she'd thought she'd be stripping off in disgrace after the court-martial. Instead, pinned to her chest were 3 new additions: the FAA's Award for Excellence, United Airlines Distinguished Service Medal, and a promotion to lieutenant colonel. "Morning, everyone," she began. "I'm Lieutenant Colonel Chen, and I'm your new lead instructor for crisis management and emergency procedures." The review board had called her 5 days after Sacramento. Sarah had stood in her apartment, phone pressed to her ear, barely breathing as the board chairman spoke. "Major Chen, in light of recent events demonstrating your judgment under extraordinary pressure, the board has reevaluated your actions in Afghanistan. Your decision to engage that convoy, while a violation of direct orders, prevented a massacre. Your instinct to protect civilian lives, even at personal cost, reflects the highest values of military service." She'd sunk onto her couch, unable to speak. "Furthermore," he'd continued, "your performance on Flight 447 demonstrated exactly why we need pilots who can think independently under pressure. Your record is cleared. We're recommending you for promotion to lieutenant colonel and offering you a position, lead instructor for crisis management training. We need you teaching the next generation how to handle the impossible." Now here she was, doing exactly that. "Before we talk about emergency procedures," Sarah said to her class, "I want to tell you a story. It starts on a Tuesday afternoon with me asleep in seat 8A. She told them everything, not the sanitized version the news had reported, but the raw truth, the fear, the moment she'd thought they wouldn't make it, the way her hands had shaken so badly afterward she couldn't hold a glass of water, the nightmares she still had where she pulled back too late and they slammed into the ground. "You're training for combat," she told them when she finished. "You're learning to fly fighters, to engage enemy aircraft, to deliver ordnance on target. But sometimes, maybe once in your entire career, life will ask you to do something you never trained for, something impossible. And in that moment, all your training, all your discipline, all your courage comes down to a single choice: freeze or fly." A hand went up. A young female cadet, maybe 22, with sharp eyes and her hair pulled back tight. "Ma'am, how did you know you could do it? Land that plane?" Sarah thought about that. "I didn't. I had no idea if I could pull it off. But I knew the alternative, doing nothing, meant 183 people would die. So I did the only thing I could do, trust my training and try anyway." "But you'd never flown a 737, another cadet said. "How?" "I had help. A first officer named Jake Rodriguez who found courage he didn't know he had. A retired captain on the radio who talked me through it. A Navy veteran who whispered the right words at exactly the right moment. And all of you, everyone in this room, you'll have help too when your moment comes. Squadron mates, controllers, your training. You're never as alone as you feel." After class, the young female cadet approached. Her name tag read Martinez. "Ma'am, I saw the video, the cockpit recording they released. That's why I enlisted. I want to fly like you." Sarah smiled, touched her father's dog tags through her flight suit. She still wore them every day. "Then let me teach you. But remember, it's not about flying like me. It's about being ready when ordinary people need extraordinary help." That evening, Sarah drove to San Francisco International Airport. She'd been invited to a ceremony. United Airlines was retiring the tail number of Flight 447 in honor of what happened. The aircraft would be repainted with a special livery commemorating the emergency landing. Captain Williams was there, recovered and cleared to fly again. He embraced Sarah like a daughter. "My grandkids made you this," he said, handing her a drawing. 3 stick figures, him, Sarah, and Rodriguez, standing in front of a plane. Crayon text at the top read, "Thank you for saving Grandpa." Sarah's vision blurred. Rodriguez was there too, looking sharp in his uniform. "Major, sorry, Lieutenant Colonel," he grinned. "Guess what? They promoted me to captain, full aircraft captain. Can you believe it?" "I absolutely can. You earned it, Jake. Because of you, you showed me I could do this." He paused. "I heard you're teaching now. Can I come audit one of your classes? I want to learn from the best." "Anytime." The ceremony was brief but moving. Airline executives spoke. The mayor spoke. Then they asked Sarah to say a few words. She stood at the podium looking out at the crowd, airline employees, passengers from Flight 447, news media, and there in the back. She spotted him. Lieutenant Commander James Morrison, USN retired, wearing his Navy dress uniform and his Constellation cap. 3 weeks ago, Sarah began, I was just a passenger, exhausted, worried about my career, wondering if I'd made too many wrong choices in my life. I was asleep in seat 8A when everything changed. She told them about her father, about the dog tags she wore, about the letter he'd written before he died, the one that said fear was just your body preparing to do something brave. I spent years wondering what that meant, wondering if I could live up to his legacy, and then one Tuesday afternoon I found out. She looked at Rodriguez, at Williams, at Morrison. Not because I'm special, not because I'm a hero, but because I was in the right place at the right time, with training I'd spent my whole life building, surrounded by people who refused to give up. She pulled out Morrison's challenge coin. She carried it everywhere now. A wise man gave me this after we landed. He told me to pass it on someday to another pilot who does something extraordinary. I'm going to do that. But I'm also going to spend every day teaching young pilots that extraordinary isn't about being fearless. It's about being prepared, about being ready, about refusing to quit when quitting would be easier. The crowd applauded as she stepped down. Later, as Sarah walked to her car, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Major Chen, this is Amanda from Flight 447. I just wanted you to know I'm back flying. I was terrified to get on another plane, but I remembered watching you in that cockpit. How you didn't panic. How you just did the job. So I'm doing the same. Thank you for showing me what courage looks like. Sarah smiled and typed back, that's the bravest thing I've heard all week. Proud of you. She drove home as the sun set over the bay, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. In 3 days, she'd start teaching her next class. In 3 weeks, she'd be flying again. Check rides, training exercises, maybe even back to active deployment eventually. But tonight, she was just Sarah Chen, daughter of a pilot who taught her about courage, student of 100 instructors who taught her to fly, survivor of an impossible day that taught her what she was truly capable of. She pulled into her driveway and sat in the car for a moment, hand on her father's dog tags. I get it now, Dad, she whispered. I finally get it. Fear wasn't the opposite of courage. Fear was the price of courage. And sometimes, when the world needed you most, all you could do was pay that price and fly anyway. She'd been asleep in seat 8A, just another passenger on just another flight. Until the moment she wasn't. Until the moment life asked her to become something more. And she'd answered,